everyone. Welcome back to the Good Doctor's coverage of Hulu's possibly limited, probably not, because
Probably
Hulu,
limited. I don't know.
who has any idea? Mrs. America, because the story of Mrs. America is certainly not over in real life, so it's probably could keep getting fictionalized. This fictional telling of the process to ratify and or not ratify the Equal Rights Amendment stars Cate Blanchett, and a whole host of other people, including Rose Byrne, who we're about to talk to. God, could you imagine?
Oh my gosh.
Talk about this episode.
Guys, Rose Byrne is joining us now.
Rose Byrne. I'm Dr. Kristen.
I'm Dr. Erin.
And episode 2 of Mrs. America focuses on Rose Byrne's character, Gloria Steinem, as the figurehead of the women's movement in this particular episode, which is still very focused on Phyllis Schlafly. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the things I've liked so far about this series, just as an aside before I get into a quick summary, is that it is showing that there really wasn't ever a unified women's movement, even though we pretend there was.
Yeah.
There was a unified goal in this particular case. There was a unified goal in suffrage. There was a unified goal. But even in this unified goal, Gloria spends most of this episode wheeling and dealing for abortion rights and not the Equal Rights Amendment. So...
Right. And we get a sense for some friction between her and Betty Friedan, and like the kind of the different levels of involvement and age. Like I think Bella Abzug and Betty Friedan both see themselves as like the matriarchs.
And I don't think the other women see them that way at all.
And then you've got like Gloria, as an upstart magazine editor, and Betty gets kind of upset about the way that they talk about Gloria Steinem. And so, I enjoy the diversity, let's say diverse opinions and goals of the women's movement, which obviously there are in any movement, but
historians especially tend to present the 60s and 70s women's movement as a monolith.
Right.
Which it absolutely was not.
No.
And we'll talk later in the year about the suffrage movements, and how even in what is seemed to be a very unified suffrage movement, there was at least 3 specific camps. So, and the way that we don't do anyone any favors by making things monolithic. We really need to stop the Twitterification of history, but that's a separate rant for a separate day. In this episode, there are what we continue to see is Phyllis being the woman who controls the neck of the chicken in that old Greek proverb, and is within her definition of how she wields power, wielding it absolutely. In a lot of ways. Her breadwinners campaign using the stereotypes of her people, even though they're not her people, as we covered in the last recap.
She's not a homemaker.
Not a homemaker. She hires other people to make her home.
Or uses her sister-in-law.
Valid, but let's call a spade a spade.
Right, yeah.
Like, I would never call myself a homemaker. I'll make a home. I barely make toast. Like, that's just not...
I can make tapioca pudding.
Yeah, if I follow a recipe exactly, I can make meatloaf. So, let's...
But no, she is one of the most liberated women in the 70s, really.
Yeah.
On this high-profile level. Arguing against women's lib.
It's utterly fascinating, and Cate Blanchett is acting the living crap out of it. We need to say every single performance in this series is...
Yeah, no, she's amazing.
So that's Phyllis's bag. Gloria's bag, we really see a little bit of the workings of how they're lobbying specific senators and governors, and they're working with McGovern, and how that kind of looks like. I personally really enjoy, there's a scene with a whole bunch of people, including Betty Friedan, and Betty's behavior loses them the attention of the senator, and Gloria gets it back. And I appreciated that for a lot of reasons, because I've certainly taken classes on rhetoric, and I've been in fundraising positions and things like that. And often, again, those positions of negotiation are kind of said, this is how you get people to agree with you.
Yeah.
But there are people for whom what Betty did would have worked.
Right.
But it clearly didn't work on that guy because she didn't read the room.
Very different styles of communication.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting to see Phyllis kind of stumbling her way through. Like, she gets on Donahue, right? And she thinks she does really well. And then the pro-ERA women in Illinois call her out for not really knowing the legality of it. And Donahue calls her out for not really knowing her facts. And he's like,
so
I'm not a constitutional law scholar, but...
Yep.
So it'll be interesting to see what she does with that. She clearly finds a way to lobby in Illinois, and they lose. The ERA loses in Illinois. I thought for me, one of the most poignant moments, there were a couple with Gloria specifically, but the one where she is arguing for adding abortion to the platform. And she says, how long do we give people to adapt to change? Am I the only one so tired of fucking waiting? Because Bella is trying to get her to like, oh, we'll deal with abortion on the next platform. Like, we need to get the ERA. That has to be our priority. And how many more women are going to die from botched abortions while we wait for men to be okay with us having control of our own bodies? Literally, folks, I wrote it down because I was like, come on, Gloria.
And the thing that's very important to remember is that women were and still continue to die from termination procedures. It's not as straightforward as people watching this may believe. It's very, very, it's still a danger. I mean, being pregnant is a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
Terminating a pregnancy is a dangerous thing. All of that is dangerous. But if you have never heard some of the stories from the 60s, 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, do a quick Google search, talk to a grandmother, aunt, mother. Nearly everybody in that generation that I know knows somebody who has a story if they don't have one themselves. And it is arresting to be reminded of the fact that Gloria Steinem did a whole lot of work for a whole lot of women.
Yeah, and the other scene was at the end of the episode where you learn kind of Gloria's reason, one of her reasons for why she feels so strongly about legalizing abortion, when she has that woman like meet her outside her office building, right? And it was such a beautiful moment, like poignant moment between the two of them where they shared what is this, like, for a lot of women, because of the way society talks about them, a shameful secret or an embarrassing secret or one they might feel guilty about. There's a lot of emotions that go into that. I thought it was a simple way to show it for the show, to demonstrate it. And one of the better parts of this episode in terms of nuancing some of these issues the women's movement was dealing with in the 70s.
Yeah. I loved Rose Byrne's face acting in the scene where she remembered the doctor who told her to essentially not waste your life.
Yeah.
We joke in superhero narratives that everybody's got the moment where someone is told, don't waste your life. Yeah. And that is Gloria Steinem's. And that was really special, especially because at this point she knew that it was, we should say too, that the level of care that somebody receives regarding abortion and sometimes the level of safety of the termination procedure largely involves how much money you have.
Yeah.
And in what country you live in. This is something that we saw a lot with the movement in Ireland recently, the referendum in Ireland.
What your race and ethnicity is as well.
Correct. And so while for upper middle class white women in New York City, it might be a very straightforward procedure because medically it can be. For Native Navajo women, it is not. So and to understand that she understood that kind of from the beginning, at least the way Rose Byrne is playing this. I have not read Gloria Steinem's book in which she talks about this. I actually just found out that it is talked about in a book, so I've
me neither. Yeah, add it to the list.
Because I'm fascinated by it. I've only read her seminal works, which I read for school. But the way that Rose Byrne is playing it is that she understands that intersection of her privilege and very much is like, okay, well, I've got to pay this forward. I can't be the only one that could go to this very ritzy doctor in the UK because I happen to have this experience. I need to make sure everybody has it. And that is a very powerful counterbalance narratively to the opposite of what Phyllis is doing.
Yeah.
Which is, I have this privilege of choice and I need to make sure in a certain way no one else kind of gets it. And that is a really powerful understanding of self-determination and consent to your own life and all the other things that truly the women's movement is about.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. This episode showed two very different women with two very different ideas of what it means to be a woman.
Yeah, correct. Wow, yes.
And what that takes. But I also thought that the kind of the storyline they're developing, whether or not it's true or they're exaggerating for dramatic effect, is kind of the lack of, and we start to see they're taking Phyllis a little bit more seriously by the end of this episode, but kind of the lack of seriousness that the women's movement is applying to stop ERA. And they kind of show you that, and Phyllis thinks, she says the feminists think this is settled, but it's not. And like, spoiler alert, if you don't know what happens to the ERA, you can look it up. But it was not a settled, certainly not at this time, while they're fighting for it in I think 1972 or 3, I forget what this episode is, early 70s. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they develop that one going forward. How soon the women's movement wakes up and realizes that Phyllis Schlafly has some political punches.
Yeah. So it's a great reminder. The show continues to be very much worth your time.
Yes.
We feel strongly. And I'm sure that in the next episode, which focuses, I'm sure still on Phyllis, but also ostensibly on Shirley Chisholm, we believe it will still continue to be worth your time. And we will see you for a chat, in fact, about that episode.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.